This is the Rif Beitza Daf Yud Zayin. Continuing with the Gemara. Tano Rabbanan, Yom Tov Shechalios b'Shabbos. You have Shabbos and Yom Tov, and they fall on the same occasion. So, what are you supposed to say in Shmona Esrei? The typical Shabbos Shmona Esrei is 7 brachos. So Beis Shammai Omer Mispalel Shmona. You should say 8 brachos here. Shel Shabbos b'fnei atzma. Shabbos gets its own blessing in Shemona Esrei, v'shel Yom Tov b'fnei atzma, and Yom Tov gets its own blessing. U'Beis Hillel Omer Mispalel Sheva, you do the typical 7. Matchil b'shel Shabbos. With this blessing, you begin with mention of Shabbos. U'Misayim b'shel Shabbos, and you close with mention of Shabbos only. V'Omer Kedushas Yom Be'emsa, and you put the sanctification of the day. You say that in the middle. So that way, you're incorporating both Yom Tov and Shabbos into this bracha. Rabbi Omer, he has a slight modification of Beis Hillel, because remember, Beis Hillel basically says that you should end B'Shel Shabbos and not with anything else. Rabbi Omer, Af Choseim, but you also end with it, with all of this. In other words, you would say, Mekadesh HaShabbos v'Yisrael v'Hazmanim, who sanctified Shabbos, Israel, and the seasons, the festivals. Now, Tanei Tana Kamei Ravina, Tana, that's somebody who says over Tanaitic statements. Tanei Tana Kamei Ravina, he said in front of Ravina. How exactly should you close this? Mekadesh Yisrael v'Hashabbos v'Hazemanim, who sanctified Israel, Shabbos, and the seasons. So Amar Lei, Ravina said to him, Atu Shabbos Yisrael Mekadesh Lei. Because of Shabbos, Israel is sanctified. Shabbos HaMekadesh v'Kaima. Shabbos is sanctified in and of itself and is established like that. It should stand alone. Ela Ema, rather you should say in the bracha, and you should say in the Tanaitic statement that you're saying. So you should say Mekadesh HaShabbos v'Yisrael v'Hazemanim, who sanctifies the Shabbos and Israel and the seasons. So Amar of Yosef, Halacha to Rabbi. We paskin like Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, that you say all 3 of these things in the ending. But the Mitaris Ravina, and as that Brisa was corrected by Ravina, that is Mekadesh Yisrael v'Hashabbos v'Hazemanim. Now Rabbanan, the sages learned in a Brisa, Shabbos shecholos b'Rosh Chodesh. Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh occur. O b'cholo shel moed, or Shabbos falls out on Chol Moed. What do you do during each of the Shemona Esreis? So, Arv Shachris and Mincha, during Marav Shachris and Mincha, Mispalel Sheva, you do the typical Shabbos davening of 7 brachos in your Amidah. V'omer me'ena ma'ora ba'avodah, and you should say Ya'aleh v'yavo with mention of the specific occasion in Ritzei. That's the way that we typically do it. V'im lo amar, and if he doesn't say it, machzirin oso, we cause him to return. He has to repeat. Now, that's him. Rabbi Eliezer Omer v'hoda. He says the same thing, that he's going to say this Ya'aleh v'yavo, but he doesn't put it in during Ritzei, but he puts it in during Modim, which is where we typically put in Al Anisim. So that's for Mariv, Shachris, and Mincha, Uv Musafin. You also have the Musaf davening. So what do you say in Bet Shemona Esrei? So Matchil b'Shel Shabbos, you should start with mention of Shabbos, and Messiah b'Shel Shabbos, and end with mention of Shabbos. V'Omer Kedushas Yom Be'emsa, and put the sanctification of the day in the middle. And that's what we do instead of the typical davening for Musaf. You say Ate Yitzarta, and that's how we fulfill this. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, Rabbi Yochanan ben Broka Omer, Kol Makam Shu Zakok L'Sheva. Any time where you would say the 7, meaning even by Mariv, Shachris, and Mincha, Matchil b'Shel Shabbos and Messiah b'Shel Shabbos, the Omer Kedushas Yom Be'emsa, you would make this joint bracha that starts and ends with Shabbos and has sanctification of the day in the middle. And that's as opposed to what we said earlier in the Tanakh and Rabbi Lazar, that you're saying this Ya'aleh v'yavo in some place. So Amar Rav Huna ein halacha ka'osa hazug. We don't paskin like that zug, but actually you do it via the ziyala v'yavo. Continuing in the Gemara, Amar B'chi bar Ashi, Amar Rav. He says, Maniach Adam erev tchumen me'erev Shabbos l'chaveiro u'masna. You could, a person can establish his erev tchumen from one day of Yom Tov to the next day of Yom Tov, and u'masna, and make a condition. And we'll talk about exactly how he would do this. V'chol shekein erev tavshilin, and certainly an erev tavshilin he could establish for the purpose of cooking from Yom Tov to Shabbos. Which is an easier case, as we'll see when we talk about the different stipulations that you make. For Erev Tavshilin, you can establish from one day of Yom Tov to the next day of Yom Tov, umasna, and make this condition. But you can't do this for Erev Tchumen. The mikna Beitza b'Yom Tov la. Because you can't acquire a house or residence on Yom Tov. The halacha in this is like Rava because he's later. So Rava said that you can make an Erev Tavshilin from one day to the other and make a condition, but you can't, presumably for others, which by others we meant Erev Tchumen. The issue is only by Erev Tchumen that you can't. Demikna Beisahu. Because that is acquiring a house. Aval. Now, how come it's mistabralan? It's because this is actually a diak that the Gemara makes in Rava's words. Rava didn't actually say this explicitly. So now the Rif is saying that this diak only applies to Erev Tchumen. Aval Erev Chatzeros Shvitzel V'Shiftu is not actually acquiring a residence, but it's annulling and nullifying your domain within that Chatzer. So that there is not a problem of mikna beisa. So then, maniach adam erevo b'yom tov rishon, he can establish his erev chatzeros on the first day of Yom Tov, and make a condition. B'nei mahachi, and this is the way that you establish your conditional erev chatzeros. You say as follows: Iha idnachola, if today is just a regular weekday, b'hai eruva lishrelan. With this Erev, it should be permitted to us to carry on Shabbos, which is 2 days from now, mi beisa lebeisa, from one house to another, mi darta ledarta, and from one residence to another. V'i ha'idna yom tova, and if today is Yom Tov, in which case I can't establish an Erev Chaseros, it shouldn't be anything. There's nothing in my words. It doesn't take effect. Ulmachar, and the next day, b'malei Shabbos, which is Friday, is Erev Shabbos. Do Yom Tov Sheni. It's the Yom Tov Sheni Shalgal. It's the second day of Yom Tov. Nei Mahachi says as follows: Iha idna Yom Tova. If today is Yom Tov, such that he can't establish his Erev Kvar Vidna Eruva Me'atmalei. He already made the Erev for Erev Chatzeros yesterday. So I don't need to do anything. And now I don't need to do anything. Via idna chola, but if today is chol, cholahu, so then yesterday's wasn't effective. So then v'hai eruva, with this eruv that I'm establishing today, this lana should be permitted to us. We should be permitted to carry from house to house and from residence to residence within this chatzer. And how does he establish this Erev Tavshilin for the purpose of cooking from Yom Tov for Shabbos and make this stipulation? So the case is slightly different. The 2 days of Yom Tov that you have in exile outside of Eretz Yisrael. So he has these 2 days as Chamshe b'Shabbat u'Mala Shabsa, Thursday and Friday. So when should he really be establishing this Erev Tavshilin? He should have established it on Erev Yom Tov, the Arba B'Shabbat, this which is Wednesday. So Thursday and Friday were Yom Tov, so he should have established Erev Tavshilin on Erev Yom Tov on Wednesday. If he forgot, V'lo Anach B'Mala Yom Tov, and he didn't do it on this Wednesday on Erev Yom Tov, He should set it up, he should establish this on the first day of Yom Tov. Dehu Cham Shabbos, which is Thursday. The name Hachin should say as follows: if today is actually Yom Tov, because remember that the Yom Tov Sheni Shel Goliath is because of Safek. So if today is actually the Yom Tov, then L'machar Cholu, then tomorrow is a weekday. V'lo tzarichna v'lo midi, and then I don't require anything, because if tomorrow is a weekday, you have no problem cooking on a weekday for Shabbos. So there's no reason to set up an Erev Tavshilin. V'ila machar Yom Tov, but let's say tomorrow is actually Yom Tov. So then ha'idna cholu, then today is chol, it's a regular weekday, in which case you could set up an Erev Tavshilin. V'hai eruva, they come menachna, and with this Erev Tavshilin that I'm setting up, l'shtirei lan, it should be permitted to us, l'meifa l'b'shulei miyom tov l'shabbosah. It should be permitted to us to bake and to cook from Yom Tov for Shabbos. V'davka b'shnei Yom Tovim shel Goliath, with 2 days of Yom Tov in general of the exile, which is the case of doubt. Aval b'shnei Yom shel Rosh Hashanah, the 2 days of Yom Tov of Rosh Hashanah, which we say has a single kedusha. No, like we say in the first parak, we discussed it already. That Ravina Yosef came to Rav Ashi B'Reish Shata. He was sitting in front of Rav Ashi on Rosh Hashanah, and it was the first day Chazi Yatziv, and he saw that he was upset, he was dejected. Amar le Amaya Tzivas, how come you're upset? And Rav Ashi said that he hadn't established his Erev Tavshilin, so he said it now on condition, and he said that was only in terms of Shem Tavim Shel Goliath, but Shel Rosh Hashanah no, and we don't hold like the Nardans, and you could look over there, it was all discussed over there in the first parak. Continuing in our Gemara, Tano Rabbanan, Ein ofen Yom Tov l'Shabbos, you can't bake from Yom Tov to Shabbos, Kal v'chom Yom Tov l'chol, and certainly not from Yom Tov for a weekday. Be'emes Amru, they said, in truth they said, which is typically halacha l'Moshe Sinai, Mamali shekidera basar, a woman may fill an entire pot with meat, she only needs a single piece. A baker can fill an entire barrel full of water, even though he only requires one jug. But to bake, but he should only bake what is required for him. A woman may even in her home fill the oven with bread. The bread bakes better when the oven is full. We paskin like him, that a woman may even fill an oven with bread. Ibaylahu is a question to them. Somebody didn't establish his Erev Tavshilin to permit cooking and baking, etc. from Shabbos to Yom Tov. From Yom Tov to Shabbos. Hu ne'asar ve'ein kimcho ne'asar? Is he forbidden to cook, but his kemach, his flour, is not forbidden? Or perhaps both he and his flour are forbidden. L'may nafkamina. What is the halachic ramifications? Whether he needs to give over ownership of his flour to others. If you say that he is forbidden, but his flour is not, he doesn't need to transfer ownership of his flour to others. They can bake for him, they could bake for him with his own flour. But if you say both he and his flour are forbidden, you need to transfer ownership of his flour to others, and then they'll bake with him. So what is the law? What do we say? Tashma, come and hear a proof. Somebody didn't set up his Erev Tavshilin. He shouldn't bake, he shouldn't cook, and he shouldn't insulate. Lo, not for himself, lo achirim, nor for others. V'lo achirim ofen mevashlan lo, nor do others bake or cook for him. Keitahu osas. So now, what should he do? He's in this jam. What should he do? So machnakim chol achirim. He should transfer ownership of his flour to others. V'achirim ofenu mevashen lo, and then others will bake and cook for him. Shema mina, we derive from here that two nesar v'kimchas nesar, both he and his flour are forbidden. Shema mina, and we indeed so deduce. Ibailahu, it was a question to them. Avar v'afamai, let's say he violated and he did bake. Mikan sur Rabbanan olah. Do the sages fine him? Do they penalize him or not? V'asinu lemifshita mihad desanya, and they came to resolve this from this that it said in a brisa. Somebody who did set up an erev tavshilin, there is a ofem mavashel u'matmin. He can bake and cook and insulate. And if he wishes to eat his erev on his erev tavshilin on Yom Tov, he has permission to do so. If he ate it when ad shalo, before he cooked and before he insulated, such that when he wants to start cooking or insulating or whatever, the erev tavshilin has already been consumed. Harezeh lo yivashel v'lo yatmin. He shouldn't cook and he shouldn't insulate. V'lo yafa, and he shouldn't bake. Lo v'lo achirim, not for himself, not for others. V'lo achirim ofen mevashel lo, nor may others bake and cook for him. Aval mevashel hu liyom tov, but he can cook for Yom Tov itself, though not for Shabbos. Vim hotir, and if there is stuff that's left over, hotir, then there's left over l'Shabbos, and he could eat that on Shabbos. U'vavad shelo yarim, such that is, so long as he doesn't try trickery, that he's pretending that he's cooking so much for Yom Tov, but really he intends to have extra such that he could eat on Shabbos. V'merim, and if he did do this, he did conduct this trickery, asur, it's forbidden for him to eat. Ushma mina, and we derive from here, dima varafa, that if he violated and baked, asur, it is forbidden. V'dachi Rabbi Chia, and v'dachi Rav Ashi, and Rav Ashi rejects this proof, and he says, shani harama, this kind of trickery is different. Dachmer Rabbi Rabbanan Tvei Mimezid, because that's the sages were more stringent with that than a typical willful violation. Below ifshita ba'ayam, and so our question is not resolved. Now the Mishnah said Beis Shammai Mishnei Tavshilin. For this erev tavshilin you need 2 cooked dishes, and Beis Hillel said you only need 1. So the Gemara says Masnisin Deloki Haitana. The Mishnah is not in accordance with the Tana of a Brisa, the Sanya that we learned in a Brisa, Amr Shimon Elazar. Both agree that you actually need these 2 cooked dishes. Al na nechlaku. What are they arguing about? The next thing that was mentioned in the Mishnah, Al dagu veitza shalav, regarding a fish and an egg that was smeared on top of it. Beis Shammai omrim shnei tavshilin, Beis Hillel omrim tavshil achad. The Beis Shammai say 2 tavshilin, namely that you require 2 tavshilin, and this doesn't count as one of them. Beis Hillel omrim tavshil achad, and Beis Hillel say this 1 tavshil counts as shnei tavshilin, and it's 1 tavshil which is valid for it. Which that's Rashi's way of reading it. Tosfos has another way of reading it. And he has to reverse a little bit of the language in the Gemara there, but it's somewhat difficult. But anyway, we have the Mishnah not in accordance with his Brisa. So Amar Rabba halacha kitana didan. We paskin like our Tana, namely like our Mishnah. Ba'aliva de Beis Hillel, and according to Beis Hillel, that Beis Hillel say lo tzarich al tavshil achad. You only need 1 cooked dish. Continuing, Achlo Shavad, if he ate his erev tavshilin on Yom Tov, or he lost it, Lo Yivashel Lavachatchila, you can't then cook initially from Shabbos, from Yom Tov to Shabbos. So Amar Abaye says, Nachtinan, we have a tradition that Hitchil B'Isasal, that if he began his dough, and then his erev tavshilin was consumed, Gomer, he can finish his making of the erev. So now on to the Mishnah. Chalios achar haShabbos. So Yom Tov is now on Sunday, so it's immediately after Shabbos. So mostly Shabbos goes into Yom Tov. Beis Shammai omrim matbilin es hakol. In terms of immersion of kalim or of people, which are tamei. So Beis Shammai say you immerse all of them milifnei haShabbos. You have to do that on Erev Shabbos. Uveis Hillel omrim kalim milifnei haShabbos. Kalim, vessels, you can immerse on you should immerse before Shabbos. V'azim b'Shabbos, and man you should immerse on Shabbos. Now on to the Gemara. D'chulei alma mihas kalim b'Shabbos lo. Everybody agrees that vessels on Shabbos you shouldn't immerse. You should be immersing them on Erev Shabbos. My taima. What is the reason? And we're going to go into this reason on the next daf.